Tonight, we will have the pleasure of hearing from Garrett Jackson, Sophia Tainai, Morgan Robinson, and Christian Nagari. Looking forward to seeing all of your work. And with that, I will turn it over to Garrett Jackson.
Thank you. Give me a second. I'm just sharing my screen. Do you guys all see this? Thought I saw some head nods, so I'm gonna assume so. Yeah, there we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Garrett Jackson, and my thesis was to create a virtual representation of a Git repository or repo. Why isn't this? There we go. So why do this? Well, for me, code is this ephemeral and intangible thing. Its complexity or simplicity is hidden from view. Coding projects can quickly grow to a massive size, especially in corporate environments. These coding projects can be so challenging to intrinsically understand how a multi-person project was developed over a period of time. So my objectives for this project was to be able to read from GitHub and to translate that information into a usable format, to create a graphical process or method of viewing this code over time. I wanted to explore how a virtual representation could add intuitive and natural comprehension of a Git repository. I wanted to gain a much more comprehensive understanding of Git, especially as it still continues to be such a massive player in the industry. I wanted to obtain exposure to game development in Unity, something I had not touched prior to this thesis. Well, let's look and see how it turned out. I'm going to just okay. So I wanted to create something like that wasn't in a void. It was a kind of just homey feeling. You're in a forest, you got the night sky around you, you're not in this cubicle, you're not in an enclosed environment. Because VR is all about being open and about freedom. As you can see, there's a file. So every white or every square or cube will be a file, and every circle a folder. So I just love how there's this enclosed area that just really sets the stage. Okay, now on my left, you can see a bunch of information about the commit. We can see the author, who was Radoslav Naichev. We can see the date he committed it on July 25th, 2018. We can see his comment that this was his first commit, and we can see his commit ID. So now let's look at the next commit. So here we can see that a bunch was added in his first commit. So just at a glance, we can see that in PyTorch, we have it's directly in front of the root and deeper than the root. And it has three different folders all connected to it. One folder of which, the JPN format, has 3 files, and another folder has 2 files. We can also see in boosting that there are 2 separate folders just at a glance that just are in it, and that in those folders, one has 8 files and one has 6 files. And we can also see boosting itself has just 2 files. If we look at the bottom, we see the old file, the README, had just changed color. That's because it has aged. So no longer is it a white square, now it's become a yellow square. We also see what he commented, that specifically this was grouped as a repository and that the commit ID as well as the time has changed. So now we see that the folders have aged as well. We see that the folders have grown to be a brown, while all the files with them have grown to be a yellow. We also see that the file, that README, has changed color. This is because it's been modified. The closer a file is to deep dark red, the more modifications it's received. And if we look at the comment, what did he do? He updated the README. So now if we click ahead again, we see how this file grows again, only this time he just modified things. And we can just tell that at a glance. He modified both the README and his text over there. Yeah, he updated his requirements.txt. And so now if we take a step back and just take a moment to see how this repository grows over time. We also see that the files at the bottom are getting closer and closer to dark red. So we have reached the final commit so far that he has put into his repository. Now it may look cluttered, but keep in mind, this is VR. You can move around. You can look up and see, well, what is day 2? Where is miscellaneous? Or what is miscellaneous? What is connected to it? And we can even see at a glance, where did he spend most of his modifications? He spent them at the intro level, the stuff that everybody sees. And that's just a piece of information that you wouldn't normally be able to glean from a repository just at a glance. And thus concludes the video part of my demo. Now, how did I do this? Well, first of all, I had to access information from GitHub. To do this, I used a git bash. In the git bash, I would clone the GitHub repository itself. I would then take that GitHub repository and feed it to a Python script I wrote that uses the pygit library. The pygit library interacts or reads this repository and using several of its methods, I could take information and strip history that is stored in the repository and shove that into a JSON file or a JSON formatted text file. And I could pass that to the Unity section. In my Unity project, I specifically developed with an XR package, which is compiled using an Android APK executable. Now, why is this necessary? I mean, you would think that an Oculus would have a simple development or a simple format for just shoving straight onto its device, right? No, the Oculus package tends to be glitchy. And Oculus itself, it has a stranglehold and is very anti-developer friendly. You can't just go straight up to the official Oculus marketplace. If you wanted to, you would have to literally send them a request giving them your product information and your idea so that they could send you a code to just upload it straight to the VR. So how do you get around this? Well, you have to use SideQuest. SideQuest is this intermediate uh, tool that bridges between the Oculus and the Unity section. So what I'd do is I'd upload the APK and the build which was compiled into an APK, into SideQuest, and then from SideQuest into the Unity. And of course, I'd use the Oculus Quest, as we saw, for deployment and to actually view the stuff in VR. Now, I'm going to present a process demo of actually going through and bringing down a repository. It decided to stop screen sharing. Just hold on a quick second. Okay. So first of all, you would have to go to the repository in question, which would be Raichev right here. Grab his link. You would take this to the git bash and tell it to clone. Okay. Now, thankfully, since this is a small project, we can do that really quickly. And then we would go to our Ubuntu. Now, in your Ubuntu, you would have to go to your uh, Unity project location, specifically where you want to put the JSON file. You would have to change the Python. Okay, so now you would change this to reflect where you downloaded it. So we downloaded into dgit. So okay, so it already has the dgit selected, and we're going to shove the information, the output, into a thesis demo.txt. Okay, so we're going to run. Okay, so now if we look at here, we see that yes, our thesis demo has compiled. So if we go to our Unity section, we see the thesis demo show up. Cool, cool. And we have to shove that into our resources data. This is because through a weird a weird quirk of Android, the memory is separated from the scripts and the text files. So if you just try to access it while it's with your scripts, it won't function. You just shove that into the data. You can go to our data, yeah. Resources, now shove that into the data. Okay. Okay, we see our thesis demo. Then we build it, go to build settings and just build it. Unfortunately, this would take a long time, so I will skip this section. But once your build has compiled, you would just go to the location that the compile was built, go to your side quest, install the APK, and you would just grab this and upload it. And since my VR is connected, I can just quickly upload that. And this will take about 10 seconds. There we go. And now I could actually see that build in VR. Now I shall switch back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So in the development of this thesis, something that really resonated with me and was really important to me was something that Professor Perry mentioned very early on, and that was the idea of developing in parallel. Very early on in my thesis, I discovered, or I split this project into two threads, the Unity section and the GitHub side. I would set milestones that I would then pseudocode to in research. And it was very useful. And I found it very important for me that when I got stuck, I didn't just spin my wheels and slam my head against that wall. I would switch, I would switch tracks, and I would let that issue percolate. I would let that problem just sit in my subconscious. And even while doing something else and working on the Unity section, I'd find I'd suddenly have a, hey, what if I tried this on the GitHub or the GitHub side? And I would find that sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't, but I was still never in this point of just spinning my wheels. So what next steps would I implement for my thesis? Well, I would love to be able to create alternative representations of the repository. I think it would be a really awesome tool to be able to have a specific representation that was only for a large repository, or a specific representation that was really good at displaying small repositories. I would like to streamline the deployment process. As seen, the deployment process was a little unwieldy. There were several intermediate steps that I would like to be able to trim down. I would like to ideally just have a just a two-line run, and I would love to be able to add statistics for the repository for easy reading. Stuff like which repository is the biggest, or which folder is the biggest, which file has the most lines of code in it, which file has received the most revisions, which folder has the most files in it. And this would just be displayed on the left hand as seen with the Git information or the Git commit information. So what lessons have I learned in the pursuit of my thesis? I've learned that I need to be more open to abandoning frameworks that aren't working or just not as good as others. Many times I came at this thesis with a hardened mindset. I have these skills. This framework is supposed to cater for these skills, and I don't want to use this X framework that a lot of people talk about because it's outside of my wheelhouse. But sometimes just learning a little bit or brushing up on something is so much easier than working with a framework that just is refusing to cooperate. I learned, and especially for people who haven't taken thesis, don't allow schoolwork and other work to take as high a priority as I allowed it to. Generally, when I thought of procrastination, it was either a you're doing your work or you're not. It's either you're doing well or you're not. There was many times where I had work, and it wasn't necessarily stuff I could put off. I had a project for Japanese that I had to do, and that's much more important, right, than this thing that's looming over me in the future. But yet, if you do that too often, it's just gonna make your life so much worse. Finally, I learned a budget for install and framework incompatibility. In our program, you don't really have to deal with managing different frameworks that may or may not be compatible with each other. You may go into something thinking it'll be super easy for a framework to be able to do this, and then you'll just port that over to the another framework, and it just doesn't work. Or you have to just spend time just setting your environment up, and that's not really something I had budgeted any time for going into this thesis. So moving forward, I do believe that I am a better coder and a better person for doing this thesis. I do think I have changed and learned lessons that I will take forward to me, whether I'm coding or not, for the rest of my career. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, do we have questions for Garrett?
Yeah. So you mentioned, you're in VR, so you're able to move around, look at this repository. So how is the movement set up? How do you have it set up currently? Is it, 6 degrees of freedom allowing you to move your head around? Do you have some built-in locomotion, or is it just room scale? You have to actually be able to walk around your actual present space to be able to move around, or did you build in some kind of locomotion?
Well, this goes back to that framework incompatibility issue. So originally, I was using the Oculus package with the Oculus Quest, and that one did have locomotion and just like movement and teleportation. However, there were some issues that it wasn't compatible with some other things I was doing. So I had to tear that out. So the XR, which was the second framework I jumped to for the VR, is just a room scale right now. I would love to. Next step would probably be to add actual locomotion. So you just have to walk around the room right now.
Hey, Garrett, I'm wondering about, when you look at an entire repository, it seems like it could be overwhelming. Is there a way to like filter to maybe one file or a group of files? And if there is there some way to use the VR to make that filtering process? What would be your thoughts about maybe how to select the things that you want to filter?
Interesting question. Filtering in VR, just as a general rule, tends to be horrible. I hate using the keyboard in VR, and it's much, much easier to do that in real life. That being said, it would be much easier to filter timestamps than actual folders or files. For example, having some sort of sliding scale on your left hand, or you just click a button and it just moves over to maybe the third commit or the fifth commit instead of having every commit. But yeah, I do get what you're saying. I'd also well, it wasn't applicable for this repository, but it would be easier to also filter out branches and authors. So I would probably say the way to go wouldn't be like, I'm going to look at this file name, I'm going to look at this folder, but to more look like to more look at which let's separate this by author. Let's separate this by commit. Let's separate this by branches, that kind of deal. And that would be an interesting thing to do going forward in my project.
What was your process, or what did you use to build out your actual mapping of the repository in Unity?
I used, so let me make sure I understand the question. Are you asking how I got the information and then put that in Unity, or how I actually created the VR aspects of it?
The actual visual. So once the data is already in in Unity, how did you make that asset that's actually mapped out in VR that you can look at?
Ah, I see. So, so to walk the tree, you have to basically use recursion. So there was a heavy aspect of recursion in the Unity segment. Essentially, I had two different checks to see whether it was an old folder. If it is, then don't draw anything new. Or if it is an old folder, take out the new prefab, shove in the old prefab, or instantiate over the new prefab. Well, not instantiate over, but to destroy the old one, put the new prefab in. So then there was that check for both folders and files. But what was really important for me was, what was really hard for me was to draw the lines, because it's unless you get it exactly right. And for me, that was right when you create the old folders and files, it's hard to keep the end coordinates positioned correctly with the starting coordinates, because those get lost really quickly. So I just kind of I created a folder class and a file class that held like start position and other important parts of it. Other than that, yeah, just the recursion. Also I had in the update, I had an input trigger. Well, actually, no, that was with a different model. Um, I actually called this from a separate file that called what I called the loader. So on a certain trigger that is linked to the right hand, to call a script that is placed on the flower pot. So then that would only call the first run, then the second run, then the third run, etc. Does that answer the question, or do you want me to go more in depth to it?
That answers the question. It sounds like you shouldn't delete that flower pot, though.
Oh, hell no. I once did that, and it was just everything started breaking, and I didn't know why. Because I just had the flower pot without the script on it, and I thought it was all fine, and yeah, it wasn't.
Okay, any last questions for Garrett?
I just had a small one of, you talked about how like the square would go more towards red or magenta as it had more commits. And I was just curious, is that relative to like all of the repository, or is it like as you approach 200 commits or something, it's just always going to be red? How did you figure out what color or shade of red it should be?
Good question. I really struggled with this part. I didn't think it was going to be as hard as this was going to be. But essentially, I, especially with the Oculus, the colors, I don't know why, but the colors just wouldn't change, or at least have good enough increments of change that you can say, oh, that one's a 3 or that one's a 5. But so I tried to switch directly from like a blue to a red. So like a blue, then a light blue, then a white, then a dark red, then a red. That wasn't working because there wasn't enough change. And it was just 5 steps. So essentially I settled on a 10-step system where at first it would delete all the green in an object, and then it would go through and say, oh, let's delete all the blue. So that's why it goes yellow. Well, technically it's white with a little bit of yellow, or a little bit more whatever to be yellow. So that's why it goes to the purple, because you're deleting the green out first, which is blue plus red. And then you take out the blue, and then it's just red. So in essence, I think it was approaching 10 or 12 that it reaches the max color that it's going to be. So yeah.
All right, why don't we give a round of applause to Garrett, signify by actual hands or perhaps by emoji. Excellent. Good job, Garrett. It has been a pleasure working with you closely over the last 4 years, and look forward to perhaps using you someday as an intellectual property attorney. Good luck with law school.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.